The chains around my wrists were built for something with claws. I could tell by the way the metal curved, wide enough to wrap around a limb 3 times the size of mine. I sat on the cold floor of the holding chamber, my arms pulled slightly above my head, and I almost laughed. They had prepared for a monster. What they got was a woman who hadn't eaten in 2 days and still had static in her hair from the crash. My name is Mira Voss, and 6 hours ago, I was flying a scout ship through a quiet stretch of space that wasn't supposed to have anyone in it. Then the sky lit up with hunter drones, my hull cracked open like an egg, and I woke up here, in a room built by people who were afraid of what I might be. The walls were a dull gray metal, curved like the inside of a shell. A single strip of light ran along the ceiling, humming faintly. Across from me, behind a wall of clear reinforced glass, stood 3 figures. They were tall, taller than any person I had ever met, with skin like polished stone, and eyes that caught the light strangely, like a cat's eyes do in the dark. They watched me the way you'd watch a storm through a window, close enough to feel the danger, far enough to feel safe. One of them leaned toward a small device on the console in front of him and spoke. His voice came out of a speaker near my head, translated into words I could understand. "Human, state your designation." I lifted my head and looked straight at him. Not at the glass, not at the shadows behind it, at him. "Captain Mira Voss," I said. "Scout Division, 4th Fleet. And you are?" There was a pause, a long one. I got the feeling that wasn't the answer they expected. I got the feeling they expected growling. The one in the center, older by the look of the deep lines across his face, stepped closer to the glass. His name, I would learn later, was Doran Vess, first speaker of the Kalan Dominion. He studied me the way a scientist studies something under a microscope, searching for a reaction that hadn't come yet. "You do not seem afraid," he said. "Should I be? Every report we have gathered on your species describes a creature that turns feral when caged. That claws at its captors, that would rather destroy itself than sit still." He tilted his head. "You are sitting very still." I shifted, just to feel the chain pull against my wrist, just to remind myself it was real, and not some fevered dream from the crash. "Maybe your reports were wrong. Our reports come from soldiers who watched your kind fight," said the second figure, a woman with silver markings along her jaw, her voice sharp as broken glass. "We have seen what humans do on a battlefield, the screaming. The way you keep moving even after you are wounded. We have seen humans smile while they bled." I thought about that for a moment, about the crews I had served with, about the friends I had lost in worse rooms than this one. "That's not what you think it is," I said quietly. "That's not madness. That's refusal." "Refusal of what?" "Of stopping." The room went quiet, except for the hum of the lights. Doran Vess studied me a moment longer, then straightened and turned to the 2 beside him. They spoke among themselves in a language that didn't translate, quick and clipped, their eyes flicking back to me every few seconds like I might do something unexpected if they looked away too long. I used the silence to take stock. My scout ship, the Halcyon Drift, was gone. That much I knew. I'd felt the shockwave before I blacked out. My crew, all 2 of them, Ellis Marsh and Talia Wren, had been in the rear compartment, closer to the cargo hold, which meant they had a better chance than I did of surviving the drop pods. I held on to that thought like a rope in the dark. They were alive. They had to be. The chamber door hissed open, and a 4th figure entered, smaller than the others, moving with the quick, nervous energy of someone new to their role. He carried a data slate and didn't look at me directly, the way you avoid looking at a fire you're not sure won't jump. "First speaker," he said, "the council wants a full assessment before the vote. They want to know if it's safe to interrogate this one, or if we should use Containment Protocol 7. Containment Protocol 7. I didn't know what that meant, but I didn't like the sound of it. My pulse ticked up half a beat, and I hated myself for it, because I could see Doran Vess notice, his eyes narrowing slightly, watching for the crack. "Let's find out," he said, and stepped closer to the glass, closer than before. "Tell me, Captain Voss, if I opened this door right now and removed your restraints, what would you do?" It was a test, obviously a test. I could see the shape of it, the way you can see the shape of a trap even in the dark, just by the way the ground feels wrong under your feet. I'd ask for water, I said. And then I'd ask where my crew is. You would not attack? Why would I attack? You outnumber me. You have a room full of weapons I've never even seen before. Attacking you would be the last thing I ever did, and I have people counting on me to come home. I held his gaze. That's not weakness. That's math. He blinked, slow, deliberate, like he was recalculating something in his mind. Behind him, the woman with silver markings, whose name I would later learn was Lyra Kess, folded her arms. Your species destroyed an outpost 3 systems from here, she said. 40 of our people. We watched the survivors describe it. They said the humans did not stop, even when begged, even when there was nothing left to gain. I felt something cold settle in my chest, not fear, but a different kind of weight. When was this? 2 years ago. A colony called Varen's Hollow. I knew that name. Everyone in the fleet knew that name, though most people wouldn't say it out loud if they didn't have to. That wasn't an attack, I said. That was a hostage situation that went wrong. Your people were holding 200 human colonists in that outpost as leverage for a trade dispute. My people went in to get them out. It didn't go the way anyone wanted, and yes, people on both sides died who didn't need to. I took a slow breath, steadying myself, because this part mattered, and I needed her to hear it clearly. But we didn't stop because we don't feel pain when we lose people, Lyra. We stopped because there was no one left to save, and by then, the only thing keeping us moving was making sure it never happened to anyone else. She didn't answer right away. Something shifted in her expression, small, but real, like a door opening a crack. How do you know my name? She said. You told him. I nodded toward the small nervous one with the data slate. About 10 minutes ago, I heard it. You were unconscious 10 minutes ago. I was pretending to be unconscious. It seemed safer. I gave her the ghost of a smile. I wanted to hear what you'd say when you thought I couldn't. For the first time, something like surprise crossed Doran Vess's face, quickly hidden, but not quickly enough. You listened while restrained and injured, he said, gathering information you thought might help you survive. That's what people do, I said. That's not a beast thing. That's just a person thing. He turned away from the glass and walked a slow circle around the room behind it, his hands folded behind his back. I watched him think, watched the way his shoulders carried the weight of a decision he didn't want to make alone. There is a vote happening in an hour, he said finally, still not looking at me. The council will decide what becomes of you. There are those who believe you should be studied, kept alive as a specimen to understand your kind before the next encounter. There are others who believe the safest thing is to end this before it becomes a threat we cannot contain. My throat went dry, but I kept my voice level. And what do you believe? He turned back to face me. I believed, until several minutes ago, that I was looking at an animal wearing a person's shape. I am no longer certain of that. I'm not an animal, I said. I'm not a monster either. I'm scared, Doran. I'm scared for my crew. I'm scared of whatever Protocol 7 is, and I'm sitting here doing math in my head about how many ways this could go wrong. But I'm not going to let you see me shake, because the second you see fear, you'll decide I'm exactly the thing your reports say I am, and I refuse to be that story. The room was silent except for the hum of the lights again. Lyra Kess stepped closer to the glass, studying my face the way you'd study a puzzle that suddenly had a piece you didn't expect. Your eyes, she said slowly. There is something in them. Not rage, something else. What does it look like to you? She considered the question longer than I expected. Fire, she said finally. Not the fire that burns everything around it. The fire that refuses to go out, even in wind. I didn't have a clever answer for that, so I just held her gaze and let her see it, whatever it was, because hiding it now felt like the wrong move. The nervous one with the data slate cleared his throat. First speaker, the vote begins in 50 minutes. If we intend to bring a recommendation, we need one now. Doran Vives didn't answer right away. He looked at me a long moment, and then he did something I didn't expect. He asked, "What would you do, Captain Voss, if our positions were reversed? If it were one of my people restrained in a cage built by yours?" The question caught me off guard, but I thought about it honestly, because the moment deserved honesty. I'd want someone in that room brave enough to ask questions instead of assuming answers, I said. I'd want someone willing to look past what they were told to fear and find out what was actually standing in front of them. That's what you're doing right now. That's not weakness either. That's the harder thing. Something passed between the three of them then, a look I couldn't fully read, layered with years of history I didn't understand, but I saw the shift happen. Saw Doran Vess's shoulders settle into something less rigid. There is a way, he said slowly, to bring a different recommendation to the council. It requires proof, not words, something they can see. What kind of proof? Restraint, he said. Real restraint, under real pressure. If you are what you say you are, and not what our reports describe, you would need to show it, not tell it. I didn't like the sound of that, not one bit, but I understood the shape of it. Words were cheap in a room like this. Anyone could say the right thing while chained to a wall. Fine, I said. Show me what you need. The chamber door hissed open again, and this time 2 guards entered, tall and broad, carrying themselves with the careful tension of people who had been told to expect violence. They released the restraints from the wall, though the ones on my wrists stayed locked, and they guided me forward, out of the holding chamber, and down a corridor lined with more of that dull gray metal. We walked for a while, past rooms I couldn't see into, past the low murmur of voices speaking languages I didn't understand. My legs ached from sitting so long, and hunger gnawed at my stomach, but I kept my back straight and my steps even, because Lyra Kess walked just behind me, watching, always watching. We arrived at a wide chamber with a raised platform in the center, empty except for a single chair bolted to the floor. Beyond it, through another wall of glass, I could see a larger crowd gathering, dozens of the tall, stone-skinned people filling rows of seats that curved around the room like an amphitheater. This was the council. This was the vote. They sat me in the chair, and this time they didn't restrain my arms. I noticed that. I noticed it meant something. Doran Vess climbed a small set of steps to a podium at the edge of the platform and addressed the gathered council in their own language first, then switched to the translated speech for my benefit, or perhaps for theirs, so everyone in the room understood exactly what was happening. For 3 cycles, he said, we have prepared for the arrival of humanity as one prepares for a storm. We built our defenses around fear, because fear was all the reports gave us. Today, I bring you something the reports did not include. He gestured toward me. A choice. Not a beast reacting to a cage, but a person choosing how to respond to one. A murmur ran through the crowd, uneasy, sharp with disagreement in places. You expect us to change 3 cycles of preparation because one human sat quietly in a chair? Called a voice from the seats. One of the council members, older, his voice carrying the particular edge of someone who had lost something to a war I didn't know the shape of yet. I expect you to look, Doran Vess said, before you decide. He turned to me. Captain Voss. The council wishes to know what you would do, if released fully, with no restraint at all, standing among us. I stood up slowly from the chair, keenly aware of every eye in that curved room fixed on me. My hands were free now, the chains gone from my wrists, leaving only faint red marks behind. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, but I kept my voice steady when I spoke, because this was the moment, and I understood exactly what was riding on it. I'd ask you to let me go home, I said, loud enough to carry. Not because I'm not capable of causing trouble, but because I don't want to. My crew is somewhere out there, hopefully alive, hopefully waiting for me. I want to find them. I want to fly back to a fleet that's worried sick about a scout ship that stopped answering its comms. I want to live, the same as anyone in this room wants to live. I paused, letting that settle. You built cages for something wild, because that's what fear told you to expect. But fear is a bad map maker. It draws monsters in every empty space on the map, even when the space is just empty, or worse, filled with someone who's just as tired and just as human as the story you were told was scary. Silence again, heavier this time, thick with the weight of an entire species, reconsidering an assumption they'd carried for years. The older council member who had spoken before rose from his seat. Pretty words, he said, but words are easy when a life depends on them. You're right, I said, meeting his eyes across the room. So don't listen to my words. Watch what I do next. I walked, slowly, deliberately, off the platform and toward the nearest guard, who tensed immediately, hand moving to something at his belt. I stopped a full arm's length away and held my open hands out where he could see them. "I'm not going to hurt anyone," I said, quiet enough now that only he and the nearby seats could hear. "I just want to sit back down." The guard hesitated, glanced up at Doran Vess, who gave a small nod, and then the guard lowered his hand and stepped back, letting me pass. I returned to the chair on the platform and sat, folding my hands in my lap, and let the whole room see exactly how still I could be, even with nothing binding me there but choice. The murmuring shifted. I couldn't understand most of the words, but I understood the tone, understood the way disbelief was softening at the edges into something more like reconsideration. Doran Vess returned to the podium. For 3 cycles, we prepared for a war we assumed was inevitable, built on stories of creatures who could not be reasoned with. I put it to this council that the danger of humanity was never that they cannot be reasoned with. He looked at me, and something in his stone features had shifted, something almost like respect. The danger is that they can be pushed to their absolute limit, past exhaustion, past fear, past everything that should break a person, and still choose, every single time, not to stop trying. That is not the fire of a beast. That is the fire of will. The vote that followed took another 20 minutes, full of debate I couldn't follow, voices rising and falling in that unfamiliar language. I sat in the chair and waited, my hands steady in my lap even though my mind raced through every outcome, good and bad, that could come from this room. When Doran Vess finally turned back to me, his expression had settled into something calm. "The council has voted," he said, "to release you, and to open a channel of communication with your fleet, under careful terms, to prevent further misunderstanding of this kind." He paused. "It was not unanimous. There are those in this room who remain afraid of what your species represents. That fear will take longer than an hour to undo." "That's fair," I said, and I meant it. "Fear doesn't leave a room just because one person had a good day." "Your crew," he added, "the 2 you mentioned. Our drones recovered an escape pod near the wreck of your vessel 2 hours ago. Both individuals are alive and currently in our medical bay." The relief that went through me was so sudden and so complete that I had to close my eyes for a moment, just to keep my composure in front of a room full of strangers who had spent the last hour deciding whether I deserved to live. "Thank you," I said, and my voice cracked slightly on the words, the first crack they'd seen from me since I woke up in that chamber. "Truly, thank you." Lyra Kess stepped forward from where she stood near the platform. "You held that fire the entire time," she said, "even now, when you finally have a reason to let it show." "That's the difference," I said, wiping my eyes quickly and steadying myself. "It's not about never feeling anything. It's about choosing when to let it out, and making sure it's the right moment, for the right reason." I looked around the curved room, at the dozens of faces still watching me, some soft with new understanding, others still guarded with old fear. You expected a beast because a beast is easy to explain. A beast just reacts. But a person who chooses, again and again, not to become the story you were afraid of, that's harder to explain. And honestly, that's the scarier thing, if you think about it long enough. Doran Vess allowed something close to a smile to touch the corner of his mouth. "Perhaps," he said, "that is exactly why humanity should never be underestimated. Not because of what you might become in anger, but because of everything you refuse to become, even when anger would be so much easier." I stood from the chair one final time, free now, in every sense that mattered, and looked out at the council, at the room full of people who had built cages out of fear, and were only now beginning to understand that the strongest thing they had ever captured wasn't a monster at all. It was just a woman who refused to stop trying, and somewhere down a quiet corridor, behind a door I hadn't seen yet, my crew was waiting, alive, breathing, ready to go home. That was enough. That was always going to be enough.